not as thoughtful or as well constructed as my good friend Sudhir. I can't match him at least, in his cogency of argument, in his logic, and in his dispassionate reasonableness in his application to the subject. I am a direct participant in the process, so I can't be as dispassionate as Sudhir was. So I might, get into a little bit of subjective issues. Now, to get things going. Currently in our country, and sad to say, across many mature and advanced democracies as well. I'm not saying India is mature and advanced, but even amongst the mature and advanced democracies, freedom in general and freedom of speech are under various assaults. He called it pressure. I'm going one step further. It's under active assault. In our country, it's not just the freedom of speech. Democracy itself is under assault in our country. Speaking specifically of India, you can look at every tracking tool. You can look at the Freedom House ratings for freedom of speech in India, democracy in India. You can look at the Global Democracy Institute, if I'm correct, based in Germany, or what's that called? Yeah. You can look at the Economist Intelligence Unit's ranking of Indian democracy and freedom of speech. We have taken not that we were great, but, India was always been a miracle. At the birth of the Republic, the global consensus was that India would not remain a democracy. However, we have beaten the odds. We have stood singularly in beating all theories about democracy, and we have remained a democracy by and large. Having said that, but in the last 10 years, we have taken a precipitous fall in freedom and also in democracy. It's under systematic institutional attack. Not that we were perfect in the past. We have faced challenges, but now this challenge is far more pernicious in its assault, and also it's very effective. This is reflected in the rankings by many global organizations of India's democracy and freedom of speech. Now in this, now coming to the media space. In this fall of freedom of speech in our country, media is a victim. One section of media is a victim, but there are also sections of the media which are perpetrators. They are obfuscating truth, directly misleading the society, and in their shrill and eager desire to please the establishment, are doing a huge disservice to freedom and democracy in our country. But however, at the same time, sections of the media which have tried to stay closer to their professional objectives and philosophy have also suffered. I'm not saying they've suffered only at one political dispensation, they have suffered at multiple political dispensations, and this is also not just in the last 10 years. This has happened in the past also, but those tensions are always there in every democracy. Nothing is perfect ever, right? So there are always issues, but now it's a systemic issue. That's the difference we see today. And there are voices in media which have felt stifled by the desire of the established traditional media houses to please the powers. Some of the voices have felt stifled and they have stepped out. And fortunately, digital media has provided space for them to have their voice. So that's a direct positive contribution of digital media, that entry barriers are low and it is allowed many critical voices to come up and to some extent at least maintain semblance of freedom of speech in our country. So I'm thankful to digital media in a limited extent at least, as a niche at least, that it is trying to maintain the philosophy of freedom of speech and journalism. So there is that. But at the same time, digital media is also now grossly misused to spread, as he pointed out, misleading information, fake information outright, falsification, and whatever follows from that. Now, nothing comes free. Pandit Nehru said, you know, eternal vigilance is the only guarantor of democracy. This has been said not only by him, by every concerned student of politics around the world, and said in better words. So also with freedom of speech. It is not automatically guaranteed. Nothing is free. You need vigilance. And what we have observed over the last 10 years around the world is that somehow misleading, misinformation, false information tends to have a greater reach. I remember a 2017 study by the US-based online portal. I'm forgetting it's a popular name. So they did a study of news spread during the 2016 presidential elections in US. They found that they took New York Times and Washington Post as the verified news sources. They compared that with absolutely fake information. They found that the fake information had a greater reach than the news from either New York Times or Washington Post. And they compared this over several issues and several topics. And consistently, fake information was reaching far more people, faster, and having a greater impact. So, we can't dismiss this. We have to admit that fake information, misinformation are a serious presence in our society today, in India or around the world. Further, I don't know how many of you remember, because I am a participant in the process, so I have to bring this up. Oxford University Press or Cambridge University Press every year comes out with a word of the year. In 2016, December, they published their word of the year, and that was post-truth politics. Today, we inhabit a world of post-truth politics. This is also a reality. Whatever your concepts say, whatever your theories say, whatever your philosophies say, whatever we may stand here and pontificate about freedom of speech, fact is, today, fake news, misinformation are having a faster, greater reach, and outright falsehoods are the reality of our domain. At some points, I may be a victim, Krishna Byre Gowda, at points. At times, I may be a perpetrator also, right? Because I'm not perfect either. So we are all trying to, but this is the reality. I'm not pointing finger at anybody, but this is the reality. Such being the reality, and this has real life implications. Not only do regimes get changed, thrown out, based on these, And with the advent of Facebook and now the extinct Cambridge Analytics of how you manipulate the minds of the people through the digital platforms. Now science and media coming together to systematically manipulate the society itself, that I having the ability to prey on your mind and get out of you desired outcomes. When all of these come together, they have real life consequences. Now let's leave there and, regime change, well, we got to live with it. If you're in the regime, then you be prepared for the change. That's what you might say, I accept that. Let's, come down to the lower level. In India, we have noticed that systematic exploitation of avenues of fake news has had real life consequences for common people. Violence, deaths, broken societies. So these are real life consequences. People being witch hunted, killed, maimed, lynched. These are real life consequences. So while we stand here and, theorize about freedom of speech, we can't be dismissive about the real life consequences of abuse of freedom of speech also. As a society, as regimes, we have responsibilities towards these as well. Now moving to the next broad topic I wanted to comment on. How do you, build some at least porous ring fences around truth to protect truth and around fake news to try and prevent, right? So Sudhir went through several options. There is a union government's approach, there is a Karnataka government approach, there is a European approach, there is an American approach. Today, the dominant view in America, it's none of my business to comment on another country, is that, let the fake news thrive, right? And let's celebrate fake news. Anyway, let's not go down that line. But, I belong to the class in society of elected representatives. We are also abusers of authority, right? And over the decades, centuries, around the world and in India, the established fact is that somebody else has to govern me. If I say that I am the lawmaker, I know best how to govern myself, that's a lot of hogwash. It's a lot of BS. None of us can govern ourselves. Self-governance doesn't work. I will say it boldly and loudly. I know it has implications, but self-governance is nothing but an authority for abuse. Sorry to say it very clearly in categorical terms. I have hardly come across instances where self-governance has worked. There may be exceptions, but by an overwhelming majority, self-governance hasn't worked. Particularly in India, it won't work because, again, I'm going to say something very not to be said on the stage. I'm not sure as a people we are capable of self-governance because when I'm not standing here, I'm not an elected representative. I point fingers at the elected representatives and list out the things that they abuse. But when I become an elected representative, those restraints do not apply to me. So we are very good judges when it comes to somebody else's conduct. I'm sure, this has been said very, very often. But when it comes to my own conduct, I become an excellent lawyer in defense of my own conduct. This is somehow in our genetic nature. So I'm not, sorry to say, I'm looking at the way the Indian established media has conducted itself, it gives me no belief or confidence to say that self-governance will work. Now, what might work? Will the Karnataka model work or not? Well, it's open for debate. But to take shelter under self-governance and allow abusers to proceed is definitely not a solution in my humble opinion. What is a good model that protects truth and tries to fight abuse of freedom of speech? It's an evolving model. We can work together, we can, try various combinations, but the interests of truth should be maintained. Last point is Sudhir mentioned about, he has serious reservations about bringing criminality as a consequence of truth verification. Now, when there are real life consequences to falsehoods, as I said, violence and broken homes, broken villages, broken communities, do we still not bring in a real-time consequence to falsehoods? So I believe that there must be a real-life consequence also to falsehoods. Otherwise, we as a people tend to take things very lightly. We do live in a Hobbesian world, is what I'm sadly coming to that point of view. And unless there are consequences, we will abuse the privileges that we have. So there must be, I'm not saying that should become the norm. As an exception, I believe that there have to be real life consequences. Having said all this, coming back to where I started from, the digital media. Yes, digital media is giving voices to those who can't find their voices in conventional media, or whose voices are being actively or passively suppressed in established media. And fortunately, digital media is giving them voices. To that extent, it's a great welcome in pursuit of freedom of speech. But at the same time, it's also whatever moderate norms are working on the established media are not even working on the digital media. And hence, digital media is also being abused against freedom of speech also. Digital media has also become a tool to assault freedom of speech also. We must be mindful. There is no unequivocal celebration or dismissal. We have to take these for what they are and try to see how we move forward. I hope conclaves like these, discussions like this today, will nudge us in the right direction. Nobody is perfect. Nobody is all-knowing. We all need to learn from experiences, practices, and through interactions. And I hope these interactions will help us move in the right direction. And my best wishes to the Editors Guild for taking up this exercise. I hope it will be the outcomes will lead to some real change in our approaches to freedom of speech and also to digital media. Thank you for your patient listening.
Thank you, Minister. In his address, Minister has thrown a challenge at us by the challenge of self-regulation, because of course Sudhir has talked about self-regulation, and Mr. Gowda has said that he is skeptic of the inherent resilience of a self-regulatory model. But yet, of course, this can be a long debate which can take up the rest of the day. The onus still lies on us to find out a way to propose a solution that self-regulation can actually work. Because as we've discussed, as Sudhir said earlier, in our earlier session, we've talked about, whilst, sir, you have talked about the inherent skepticism that you have about our own people's ability to self-regulate. At the same time, we've also seen, with evidence of history, of our own ability, our own government's ability, to actually interpret what reasonable restrictions mean, And across, as you also very candidly pointed out, governments across party lines have abused the system, the power that they have gotten. The same parties or the same political establishments, when they are in opposition, they have a different voice. When they are in power, they use the power to their advantage. And our own inherent legal system, the way it is evolved, has exploited those weaknesses and ensured that the system becomes more and more overarching. Therefore, self-regulation does, from our point of view, become the flag to hold. But yes, we acknowledge that we have to come up with a proposition that it does serve the purpose. It is not lip service to it. It is not for the sake of saying it, but it is actually something that does address the problem at hand. So we'll take that as challenge. It's an evolving mechanism that we're working on, and we thank you for your candid comments. We don't have too many time for questions, but we will still take 2 questions from the audience, including for Sudhir. So Sudhir, if you want to come up, including from Sudhir, for Sudhir. Sudhir, why don't you come up and we can have one more chair, and we will. I promise we'll give 5 more minutes only, Raj, because I know you are a time constraint. We'll give it 5 more minutes. We have Dr. Krishna Swami, and Mr. Krishna Byre Gowda, the top legal mind. Yes, of course.
Working? Yeah. Just a quick clarification on position, right? So I was suggesting that self-regulation, even in the EU, has failed. So the model I was proposing is a co-regulation model. Number 2, I hope I was clear enough to say that rather than an intense focus on users, meaning the speakers, let us focus on intermediaries. The speech environment has changed. Intermediaries are very powerful, especially very large online providers. Let us focus on them. That is the leverage that government has, is with intermediaries. Don't start going after the stray college student who said something about Pakistan. That is not the way to do speech regulation. The way to do speech regulation is build responsibility in the intermediary. So just those 2 clarifications.
Yes. And as the consensus is, this is the cost they can afford to take. All right. 2 questions to either of them or both of them. Please give your name.
Any question. Everybody is perfectly knowledgeable.
All right.
Hello, my name is Romil, first year MCJ School of Communications. My question is, when news seemingly becomes a commodity in this age, and each narrative of information priced differently, where do you think honest journalism stands in this age?
The idea that journalism was somehow immune to commercial pressure in some period in the past is not true. So I think we should take the idea that journalism and its production has always been a commercial enterprise. Hence, my preference is to use strong commercial incentives for journalism. So rather than using, and the minister also mentioned my aversion to the criminal law, but my aversion to the criminal law is backed up by my preference for very strong commercial disincentives. So where intermediaries, news media players do not follow basic norms, the commercial disincentives must be severe. That will hurt the bottom line, and it will allow for an alignment on these questions.
One more question. Yes, please.
I'll respond to Sudhir. I agree with him that news has always been a business. I think it's not, currently, maybe it's playing a greater role. But having said that, I'm also somewhat uncomfortable with the idea of laissez-faire playing a positive role, because, look, people like me have come to the unfortunate realization over the years that laissez-faire doesn't even work in the market itself. Right? It's an utter failure what it has produced. But having said that, I will also say it's the best system there is. I'm not in favor of anything what we have experimented with. It's the best, but to sort of say that it will take care of, it can't even take care of regular conventional businesses. And we are seeing what is happening in our country, how it is, oligopolies, and how crony capitalism is playing havoc, and it's having a consequence on the real entrepreneurs of the country. And world over too. And world over there are problems with the laissez-faire approach. So with that, I mean, it's worth thinking, but will it in any way or in a significant way correct the ills of, this domain is also something we should think a little bit more, is all I would say.
Hi, good morning, sir. So I'm Raksha Avdhani. I'm from Jain Deemed to be University, final year MA journalism student. So I really like the way you spoke. I mean, there were a lot of facts and figures, and I kind of agree with everything almost everything you said. So I have a question. So you did mention that self-governance has clearly failed in most of the cases, especially on the part of journalists, as you mentioned. So do you think there is a common ground wherein media and government can come together in a common ground, wherein there is a part of self-governance on the part of media, plus there is also a part of empowerment of journalists on the part of government. So do you think we can come to a common ground there?
So I'll answer your question. Before that, I said, before I spoke about self-governance not working for the media space, I said self-governance hasn't worked for people like me. We are the worst. If you entrust it to me to govern myself, I'm not going to work. I'm not going to be in the norms. That's why over the years, courts have stepped in very harshly and has imposed several parameters on the conduct of elected representatives. So it doesn't work, right? And there are others who think that it works. I am convinced it doesn't work. And you said, I'm happy you said, I'm almost agreeing with most of what you said, almost. That's always a good temperament to have. It's almost never absolute. We should never be an absolute in agreement with anything. Coming to your real question, I think that's what Sudhir said. And Sudhir said that in Europe, self-governance has failed. So he put it appropriately, co-governance, yes. And that fits into what you're asking. I think that's a model, yes. But also the way, Indian regimes work, if we pick, my cronies and put them in that position, which is what we are likely to do, this poses a challenge to the co-governance module. But nevertheless, it's better than all others that he listed, and that's, I think, what he also said. I will allow Sudhir to react. But to the first question, maybe you should react. How will, you are in that space. What Sudhir has proposed that, economic incentive, disincentive, can it act as a, verifier? But let Sudhir complete this conversation then.
Yeah, maybe we should give Anant the last word, right? So I'll do that. Can I just do one small clarification on the co-regulation model? So the European model relies on a code of practice. The code of practice is initially framed by the Commission. I'm sorry, I don't want to go into the Byzantine details of European governance, but it's put up for consultation. The media, all the large media players in the European jurisdiction have responded to the code of practice. It's been finalized, actually 2023 December it was finalized. 2024, in the next 2 weeks, you will see the very large online providers providing their first annual reports. So it is a model that pushes towards self-compliance, but it has teeth. If you fail to comply, the penalties are really high, in the many hundreds of millions of dollars for the large online providers. So sharp disincentives, but the model is not hinged on the criminal law. It's hinged on intermediaries who will adopt the code of practice and implement it. And the enforcement is done by transparency. You put out public reports, so civil society groups, universities, journalists are analyzing those reports. On that basis, you put some light into the journalism system, which currently is all based on black box algorithms, which none of us have access to.
So I'll give my...
Before I proceed to you, just wanted to flag this issue, not directly part of the conversation, but let's also keep in mind that there are those organized players who can be brought into either co-regulation or self-regulation. But there are large number who exist outside, but who are also in the digital space. So there is that problem also. There are, I don't want to repeat, but I hope it's clear that, and a lot of the problems come from them. So who is to answer for them? So co-regulation or self-regulation, let us say both models work, are not at all applicable to those who are outside. So where some sort of a, some independent regulation will be required is what my immediate response is.
I'll give my personal point of view. It's not the guild's status position or on any other larger bodies. I think for self-regulatory mechanism to work, yes, there has to be some punitive action. So I think just naming and shaming itself, by itself, is not likely to work. Completely agree with Sudhir, it cannot be criminal. It has to be in the civil domain. Penalties, of course, European Union model I've not studied, but if it's in millions, I think that also sounds extremely, extremely cumbersome. Some kind of monetary action may have some merit. This is my personal opinion. This is not guild's status position. I think the focus, first and foremost, has to be naming and shaming. I think that is also not being done. I think that is a model, I would say that, go step by step. Go at flagging content, naming and shaming, maybe some monetary, penalties. Press Council of India already has a certain mechanism where they do levy charges. The Broadcast Council, by the way, also, which is a separate body headed by a retired Supreme Court judge, also levies cost on its own members. I think it's important that all media entities do become part of some self-regulatory framework. That's where the governments can work. My, again, personal position has been the government can be a voice in some of these, but they definitely should not have any overwhelming authority. They can be participants on this. So there is that, that possibility. On those entities which are outside of the media domain, whether it's print, digital media like DigiPub is there, or newspapers, I think I don't have a clear answer, but I have an answer that already there are so many laws in operation. The new BNS is there. There are IT Act 69, which allows content takedown. I think maybe we should try and see whether those mechanisms can be used to sort of deal with content, which is very overtly problematic. One can see how this evolves, but my own personal position again would be create a much more enforcing, enabling, collaborative self-regulatory mechanism. Criminal domain has to be out. Even content takedown has to be the last approach. I think naming and shaming, flagging, and by the self-regulatory body, some kind of monetary penalty, not prohibitive because we don't know how it will be used, and letting the existing laws deal with those who are outside of it before we figure out how to bring them within some domain could be one way to go about it.
I didn't want to get in after your concluding remarks, but I have to say this. I just want to clarify that I agree with both of you to the extent of organized players. But the unorganized players, flybys, I think, whatever you guys have put on table may not work on them at all. What you're suggesting, I think, will work greatly on the organized players. But there are a large number who are outside your fold for whom I think civil nature alone may not be enough.
Well, fortunately for the government, I'm saying for the government, they have made the criminal laws so so expansive that they can, BNS 352, I think it's called, is now criminalizing for the first time misinformation. So already there is this statute, which is very problematic. But I think this is a long debate. Thank you. A big round of applause to the Minister.